I basically got 4 investors out of 5. It was $150,000. They kept raising the price. I only went there for 50,000. And no, we'll do more. We'll do 100. No, we'll do 150. So I ended up negotiating.
Well, we just got done interviewing Jeff Widerich of syndicatedpuzzles.com, who's also the creator of the Straits puzzle game. And really interesting interview. What were some of your takeaways, Nate?
Well, I think Jeff has a background in architecture, and it really came through in the way that he thinks about games and their sort of spatial characteristics and how he approaches building and thinking and creating games from the presence of a pen and paper, and just thinking about the spatial connections between them. And so he just approached it in a completely different way, and I really like that about his approach. What about you, Aaron?
There were so many different nuggets, and you'll just have to listen to the whole episode. But I think personally, being a fan of Shark Tank, and I think correspondingly its origins in the Dragon's Den, hearing his experience going on Dragon's Den in Canada and some of the takeaways from that were certainly interesting to me as an entrepreneur. So without any further ado, here's the episode. I'm Aaron Cardell, and I'm here with my co-host Nate Cadlack. Today, we're excited to speak with Jeff Widerich, the president of Syndicated Puzzles. Jeff is an architect, artist, puzzle maker, and visionary. He has a long history of understanding and creating art, and he specializes in three-dimensional concepts. Aside from art, he is an avid mind game creator and an enthusiast, with Straits being his most well-known creation. Jeff is a partner in Syndicated Puzzles, which is a business that publishes different kinds of puzzles for print and other media. And it has a focus on classic mind games, as well as their exclusive creations like Straits 1 to 25 and Letterlicious. Straits was featured in the hit television show Dragon's Den back in its 8th season in 2010. Jeff, we're thrilled you're here. Jeff, we always like to start out and ask, what's your favorite game to play?
I'm not a game player. I don't really play games. I have a very different mindset when it comes to games or concepts or anything like that. My real enjoyment is seeing the spatial parts of a game more than the game itself. So I get very interested in games that are well thought out and very organized in a way that my brain can even understand them. So it's very interesting. I'm a very spatial guy. I don't really have any number abilities. I'm not a math guy. I'm not a computer science guy. I'm very three-dimensional. So I see things in space rather than in numbers or anything like that. And that's It has been a huge advantage for me to invent stuff that way, because what happens is I look at something very different. I don't look at it as a number sequence or anything like that. I look at it as space more than anything else. I'll give you an example. So in the Sudoku wave, there was a bit of heat on for somebody to find the next Sudoku substitute or add-on, right? And Sudoku variants don't really interest me. My interest was coming up with something completely new. So what I did is I simply took a piece of paper and wrote down all the things that could possibly make a puzzle: addition, subtraction. And when I wrote down sequence, I knew right away that was the one to tackle, to go after the sequences: poker, rummy, all those things. They're really interesting because people can associate with that because they already know how to play poker. They already know how to play rummy. And when I started to write it down, it took me 4 or 5 minutes to figure out Straits. And I overlaid it on top of a 9x9 grid. And the only thing I had left to do was to add the black squares with white numbers. Without those black squares with the white numbers, which eliminates a number, the puzzle didn't interest me. It was the spatial challenge of having the black number with the white number, the black cell with the white number. That would break up the puzzle in such a way that you could make it more interesting. And so in 5 minutes, I developed Straits, and I spent 1 hour trying to destroy it, rip it apart, change it. And I said to myself, you got it. Why bother touching it, right? So that's what I did, is I stopped right away. And I have no abilities to make this puzzle in using code. So I had to contact somebody. So I found Andrew Stewart, he devoted his whole life to Sudoku. And he said right away, yeah, I'm in. Let's do this, right? So we created a player, and we were off to the races with Straits.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I'm wondering, just knowing that you don't come maybe from that coding background and you partnered up with Andrew on the generator, for that very first puzzle, did you kind of hand generate that puzzle yourself, and it just happened to work? Like I think, like when I think about all these people that manually set a Sudoku, for example, like it seems like that's a lot of, like, there's a talent to that. There's a process to it. And it's just, it's impressive to me that you could maybe, do that first one in 5 minutes. So, would love to hear more about that.
Up to this date, I have never made a Straits puzzle, ever. I've never made with a pen and paper. I have never made a puzzle complete. I just gave Andrew the parameters, and he made it. So I wasn't going to waste my time making one, because it's tough. To make one Straits by hand, I would say maybe 10 hours, 10, 12 hours. A lot of erasing and moving back and moving numbers around. So I just gave him the parameters, and I think it was like 6 hours later or 10 hours later, he had it done.
That's cool.
So it was quite quick.
Was that the first puzzle that you guys collaborated on, or how did you meet Andrew?
Straits was the first one. And Andrew is sort of recommended as the best Sudoku guy in the world. He's ripped that thing apart and dedicated, a big part of his life to Sudoku itself. He was doing the Sudoku at the beginning for some of the large newspapers. And so he had to, do a really good job of making Sudoku puzzles interesting. There's an art to it. Like, people will, download a generator from the internet and create Sudoku puzzles. And they're not the same. They just do not have that flair to them. You need a good guy who knows what the parameters are. That's the only way you can make good Sudokus, if you have the reverse engineering. And what I mean by that is the generator will give you all kinds of great little clues on how to make a great Sudoku. The unfolding is as important as the puzzle itself, is how it unfolds and how the person can recognize the clues, right? That makes a great Sudoku puzzle. It's not easy. It's not easy to do.
Jeff, I'm kind of curious, going back, where did games enter your life? Like, where did this love or passion for games kind of begin?
So I had an art company in Toronto, and this art company, I was doing historical art like Da Vinci, and I was carving all these pieces, Mona Lisa, whatever, all these really famous pieces as a collection so people could collect them. And then I made all the chess pieces. So the queen, the king, the pawn, all of them, I carved them. So I cut out a piece of sheet metal, rotated them, cut the piece in half, and made these cards, these playing cards. So my first board
was this for an exhibit or?
For a game. I made them for a game.
For a game, okay.
So my first game was called Card Chess. So you're playing chess with cards. And I had a huge advantage. I could illustrate the board as like a historical piece. And the board was spectacular. So it was like already, a bit of an eye catcher. I made the box. I carved the pieces for the box. We photographed everything. And that's how I started to get into the game industry, is with card chess. And basically this three-dimensionality made it so easy for me to actually visualize these games. Like I made a game called Pompeii, the last 37 minutes. And what I did is I built this huge model and I set the thing on fire. So the photographer took a picture of Pompeii with all the houses and everything from above. And then we had a charcoal barbecue going, and we put all the coils on top of the model, and we set the thing on fire. And that's how we got all our playing cards, is by setting the model on fire. So that advantage was, really big for me, because I could actually make something quite realistic. And it was a lot of fun doing it as well, like doing these crazy, sculptures and models, and making a board game out of it was very eye-catching. And then I had a really beautiful thing happen. I was at the toy fair in Nuremberg, and I met this Chinese guy. And this guy was a magician with plastic. Like, he could make stuff out of plastic that you couldn't even believe. Like, he had a car that didn't have tires. It was remote control. It was a flying car. And I said to him, Anthony, what the hell are you doing at this show? Go to General Motors or go somewhere and show this car to them. It was like this plastic car that could fly. And he ended up making all my games out of plastic for me. It was insane what this guy could do. I came up with this game called Mouse Chaos. And Mouse Chaos was a three-dimensional game with chairs, walls, little mouse holes, and the dice were cheese. So the cheese, you lift up a cheese container and had a number underneath. So that was the dice. It was a very unique way of moving your pieces around. So your objective was to get the 4 mice into your nest. And I showed up with that game in, I think the first place I went to was Essen. And from what I understand, there's 6,000 game collectors. They don't care what it is. They will buy your game if it's visually very appealing. So we were selling Mouse Chaos just for the collectors to have it in their collection. It was such a crazy game. They've never seen anything like that. Like, most games are like maybe 12 inch or 14 inches, 16 inches by 16 inches. This thing was 28 inches square, and all the visual pieces. Like, it was really an eye catcher. So we did really well with that game, just for them to have it in their collection. Didn't even matter if it's played or not. It was just a collection thing, right? So it was beautiful. So
how many did you make of that?
We made 10,000 of them.
Okay.
And
wow.
we sold them. And
I'll have to go check eBay for those.
Yeah, it's a beautiful game. It's like spectacular. I kept on making more and more games, and I really focused on the German market because it's such a big market for games. And I still don't know to this day why, but I'm fluent in German. Somehow it's really weird to me that I went to high school in Germany, and I kind of always forget that I actually was able to learn German. So it's like, kind of every time I speak German is very strange for me, because I don't really associate myself as a German. I'm more Canadian, right? So it's like really strange. So going to those shows in Germany was fantastic, because, I could listen to them, what they were saying, and they didn't know that I spoke German. So it was like really cool having that secret weapon there. It was good. It was really nice.
As you compare a little bit of your just background in board games and now sheet puzzles, how would you compare the complexity in those two? It sounds to me like you came up with Straits in 5 minutes plus an hour. So that, part of that I'm sure is just your very gifted in a very specific way. But yeah, how would you compare the two?
Both of them have problems. The board game industry is very tough. We didn't have Kickstarter in those days. Like if I had Kickstarter in those days, I would have done so well. But not having Kickstarter and doing all these trade fairs in New York and in Toronto and Germany and Italy, it's hard work. It's hard work to sell 10,000 games. You know, you got to really hustle. And I ended up inventing a superstar of a board game. The game was called Crossword Pyramids. And Crossword Pyramids was very interesting because it created quite a stir, especially with the guys from Game of the Year in Germany. And they invited me to their party. They said, you need to take 6 games with you of Mouse Chaos and 6 games of Crossword Pyramids. And it was really interesting. The whole place was playing those 12 games. Like there was like another, 80 games there, but they were all playing these games. So it was like really, it was a great feeling to see all these Germans playing these two very visual games. And their philosophy is that they have like a very specific way of judging these games. And one of them is like, it has to be very family oriented. It has to have like value added, like educational value and all these things. So it was like really a cool experience having these games, in front of all these, like these are diehard gamers. Like these people, they know their games. I had a guy sit down, one of the judges from Game of the Year, never seen the game before, spells a 13-letter word off the bat. He understood the rules immediately. And the tricks and the nice thing about Crossword Pyramids is if you're a terrible speller, if you focus only on your own letters, you can win the game. So it's like a de-assembly more than anything else. If you disassemble your pyramids only, you don't steal from the other players, you end up finishing the game really early. And you stop the game and all the other points turn into negative points. So everyone has a chance, even if you're competing against like a real word expert. So it's a lot of fun. And it's a real family game. Like, you can have a 5-year-old playing with you because you can supervise him and say, look, you've got bat or you've got whatever word, you can actually see what his letters are, right? So it's really, really cool that way as a family game. So
you graduated with a degree in architecture, is that right? Is that where the spatial thinking comes from when you kind of view the world? I liken it to a writer who's really great with metaphors and connecting dots across time and stories. And is that kind of how you view games when you're thinking about them?
I'll give you an example. We built this game. I built it with another really fanatic game guy, Richard van Vught out of Holland. We built this dike building game. It was called H2O Land. And he's dedicated, like he has this great big website dedicating himself to games. And I was building this game with him. And it was like really odd to me, the suggestions he would make, because they didn't make any sense. They weren't spatial. They weren't like if you're putting dirt on top of water to make land, there's a logic behind it. So I think also not just 3-dimensional thinking, it's like what happens in real life? Like what happens when you're diking off land to make farmland? Like how do you do it? So I think 3-dimensional thinking, but also logic. Like what happens in the real world when you're doing these things? Like when somebody's chasing you in a tunnel, you need doorways to hide in, or you need a place to get up higher, whatever it may be. There's always this 3-dimensionality, but there's also what makes sense as a game designer. What can I do in this game? What can I add? What options can I give the players? What direction can I give them? What weapons can I give them? All those things have to make sense. Like so many games have these like really odd things in them. And, like in Pompeii, we had boats waiting for the people. We had a leader. The leader you could stack the pieces on top. So the leader would make the decisions. So you can take 10 people with you with your move instead of moving one person at a time. Like those types of decisions are spatial and logic. And if you can add those into even number puzzles, if your number puzzle is logical, and somebody says, I get it. If they don't get it, you're in trouble. You need to make sure that somebody says, oh, this is stupid. It's like if you make a mistake in the game right away, or there's something that doesn't add up, then people are going to reject it immediately. These people don't have any patience, like these board gamers and even newspapers, number puzzle. Like you need perfection to attract, like a really strong fan base. Like it's very interesting. There's such little room in that industry to make, grave errors. So it's very interesting that way.
Well, I think that's when I landed at Straits, it was almost immediate in terms of the rules and how you just said earlier that you drew from poker and, just and rummy and things like that. It was intuitive that was kind of exactly like baked into the game itself. And I think that just kind of affirms like exactly what you're saying is you're able to add that logic to universal sort of gameplay.
It's really interesting to me. It's interesting to me with Straits, and I'll tell you what's interesting is I've probably done maybe 50 puzzles myself, and it's like, are you kidding me? This is how I'm getting a number? Like it goes, 7, 8, 9 or whatever, and then something odd happens and I can fill in a number because something happens that's never happened before in solving a Straits puzzle. And it's interesting. There must be like, I don't know, maybe 200 oddities that allow you to find a number that you can solve by some weird event happening in the puzzle. Like if you solve 50 Straits, you'll say, oh my God, this is how I get this number. This can't be a 7. This has to be a 5, whatever it is. It's like Sudoku does not have that at all. Sudoku is very structured. That's why people like it. These really structured human beings that feel this sense of, I can work through this puzzle in a way that I can fill in every number. And that gives these really strict people a sense of comfort. It's like having a cup of coffee for them. It's like, bring it on. Like I can get through this puzzle through my systematic solving methods, and they learn these solving methods. And it's like, that's not exciting to me at all. I would rather have a number pop up because something happened in the puzzle that makes this odd circumstance give me a 7 or a 3 or whatever it is. That's why I love Straits so much, is because it has all these really bizarre oddities that occur all the time. So it's a lot of fun that way. So Andrew is one of those guys. Like he's a programmer. He will, he'll seduce the numbers in a way that he feels so comfortable with, His solvers will show all that.
I couldn't tell if Nate was smiling there because he assumes I'm a structured human being or what, but yeah. We'll set that to the side.
Yeah,
right.
Maybe.
Well, I'm curious. How did maybe this is jumping forward, I don't know, but how did Syndicated Puzzles come to be?
It's interesting. I had a big setup in the Mac store and the iOS store. I had a company, a couple of guys in India that were making Straits apps and caveman tests, and we did maybe 100 apps together. So I would sit down and draw out a spatial app for these guys to do at night because I was building a hotel at the time. So I would draw this sheet of A4 paper for them to build this app. And the Mac store opened up, and I stayed up with one of the programmers, and we registered 60 great names. Like, I mean, great names. Recipes, contact book. We got contact book for iOS and for the Mac store. Record lectures. You name it. We got these great names. So the problem we had is we only had 6 months to build these things. And there was like literally no competition on the Mac store. There was maybe 30, 40 developers at that time. And we kept getting featured every second week. We had one time where we had 4 apps featured. And then the weirdest thing happened to us. We built this iOS app called Y-O-U, and the logo was a fingerprint. And this app had broken every single rule that Apple had. Like so basically you go into this room and it had weather, it had stock reports, it had radio stations, it had everything you could imagine in this room. So Apple should have never allowed this thing. And what happened was they featured it. Not only did they approve it, they featured it. So we got up to number 9, maybe. I can't remember exactly. We got up to number 9 on the iOS store in paid apps. So it was a huge amount of money. And it was December 21st. And so if we would have gotten to December 23rd, I think it is, it would have stayed up. So on December 23rd, we got an email that your app has been removed. And it probably cost us several $100,000 because we were making, I can't remember what it was like 30,000, 40,000, something like that a day. And what happened was we would have had the 23rd, the 24th, the 25th, the 26th, the 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31, and the 1st. But they removed it the last hour or last 2 hours before. So it was like really cruel on us. But anyways. So I do have, the experience with the Mac store and the iOS store. And we did extremely well because we did crazy stuff in those days. Like we did some really cool, Caveman test did really well. We did some really, really nice apps. So it was it was a lot of fun in those days because there was so much room to do these things. I don't think it's like that at all anymore. It's just too crowded. So we had a good go at it, and the Indian developer ended up hiring 50 people from the profits. So all of a sudden we went from 2-3 employees to 50 employees all at once. So it was it was a huge shock. It was a big mistake doing that. We just should have kept the money and stayed small. But anyways. But it's a mental issue with the men in India. The more powerful they are, the higher they climb up in their class. So that was his objective, is to be more powerful that way. So it was very interesting.
And then was there part of that led then to Syndicated Puzzles being formed? Well,
the reason I worked with these guys is because we were building Straits together. And then I realized that one of the developer, Raj, was very, very talented guy. So we collaborated on many projects. And so that's it was parallel with Syndicated Puzzles because we needed Straits as an iPhone app. And we needed that before Dragon's Den. So it was like a real push to get it ready before I went on Dragon's Den. So that was really the objective of that. So it just turned out to be a great working relationship.
Good. And I'd love to hear more about Syndicated Puzzles in a minute, but before we go there, I'm a big fan of Shark Tank here in the U.S. Just curious to hear more about your experience being on Dragon's Den, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch the episode. I think the CBC wouldn't let me look at past episodes here in the States, but how was that Dragon's Den experience for you?
So what happened was I show up there, and there was a really huge article. You can still see the article, I think, written about my episode. And the problem my episode had was that we didn't need any help. Like I said to them, we need a computer to run this business, right? And it was kind of interesting because, well, why do you need us? Like, why do you need us when you just need a computer to do this, right? So it's like kind of like this very odd business where you can do everything, digital and not spend any money. You really don't need to do too much to get this to work. So I show up and they asked me to go for a walk with this guy. And I'm going like, why am I going on this walk with this guy in these tunnels, right? So I'm walking with this guy, and I figured it out later that they wanted me to be tired when I got to the bridge. There's this bridge that goes across. So I had a number 8, a sticky number 8 stuck in my pants, and they have a Sudoku board on the window that looks exactly like Straits. It has black cells. And so the girl said to me, the producer, "Don't you dare do anything bad. I know you're up to no good," she said to me, right? So I walk down the gangway, and I pull out the number 8 and stick it on the window and go down into the den. And they were really amazed that somebody was able to use the windows to their advantage, right? So basically they were in a good mood already that I did something different already than anyone else. So basically, to summarize the show, I basically got 4 investors out of 5. It was $150,000. They kept raising the price. I only went there for $50,000. And no, we'll do more. We'll do 100. No, we'll do 150. So I ended up negotiating 150 out of them. And it was interesting because it was probably the most aggressive episode they've ever had at that time, because the dragons were just like cursing each other. Like they were really angry at each other because they wanted the deal, right? And I'm going like, wow. And I stood there like a dummy, because what do you do when you have the 4 dragons fighting over you and you're standing there in plain view? You're shaking your head almost. It was like really funny. So that was a great experience. And, I got like 10,000 emails that night, and like so many people that wanted to invest. And it was like absolutely, the exposure was ginormous. It was like crazy how many people really did watch that show. I think that was almost their peak of their show. I think that when they had the highest ratings was at that time. So it was like really, really, really a great experience.
What was the final offer that you accepted? 150 for
3 dragons, 50 grand. They ended up splitting it, and I think I had to give up 10. It was 10%. Yeah.
Was it equity, or it seemed like the original proposal was maybe a royalty arrangement? Did they get equity, or was it a royalty?
It was a royalty. I think it was 5% royalty, and they actually loved that because it's more attractive to them. Like 5% wasn't a lot for us, so we ended up having no problem with that. So it was like 150. I asked for 50 for 5%, and I got 150 for 5%.
And so are you still business partners to this day with some of those dragons, so to speak?
Actually, what happened was they dragged their feet forever. One of the big guys promised me to get me into the Toronto newspapers, and it didn't work out for them. It was kind of bizarre how that went down. So we ended up taking some investment from some private people out of Manitoba, and they helped us out a lot. So it was really good. And the dragons kind of these people are so busy, they don't have really the time to they'll assign you with people that are underlings that are trying to help you. And it's not that great really, because you're not getting the attention you were hoping for. They just don't have the time for it. It's just, there's no way. So, and it really bothered them that we didn't need anything. That was like, it was so bizarre. Like they just couldn't get over the fact that a business exists that doesn't need anything. You don't need an office. You don't need a warehouse. You need nothing, absolutely nothing, just a computer and internet connection. Like really bizarre business. So that was really cool about.
Was this in the 2011, 2012 range? Is it around there?
I'm not sure. Maybe it was
later?
2010, maybe, or I can't remember exactly.
So Jeff, one thing I want to talk a little bit about is timing and maybe how that's played a role in your career. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So let's say I invented Straits in 1974. In 1974, the newspapers would have been very powerful in terms of, everyone was buying a newspaper, would have been playing these puzzles in print form. Straits came after Sudoku, and the newspapers were basically complaining about not having any money, or newspapers were not being used anymore. They were digital or online. So timing is really a big part of gaming and creating games. And the other thing is, so if I'm a game designer or board game designer, for example, I would be completely immersed in Kickstarter. So I would say, okay, forget the common ways of selling games or board games. Let me focus on exactly what the successful businesses are doing on Kickstarter. And so what I'm saying to young designers is, don't just focus on your game, focus on what's surrounding you. What's going on online? What's going on in these platforms where you can sell stuff? What's going on in the mood of people? Like, are people still playing games? What kind of games do they want? Like, that has to be a big part of the research as well, not just inventing games. It's like, I had no interest in Straits, but I said, okay, there's this fight going on for somebody to figure out what the next Sudoku will be. Well, I might as well throw my hat into the race because I'm pretty good at it. Let me try it out. And that was the motivation for me to even make Straits. And young designers have to sort of say to themselves, what's missing in the marketplace? What abilities do I have? What can I do to make money? Or what can I do to get, a bit of fame? Or what can I do to conquer new markets? So the opportunity is there, but you have to sort of say, okay, what exactly is the opportunity that's in front of me? And just designing a game is good, but then you have to even tweak that game to make it accessible to people. That's the interesting thing, is that designing stuff isn't just enough anymore. Maybe in the 70s and 60s it was enough, but I think now there's like so much baggage that goes with game design, and you got to be very, very good at that.
Yeah, that's a great lesson for people building right now. In content, there's a term called trend jacking, which maybe you're alluding to. Would you consider AI being that thing at the moment? Like, what if you were building something new today, which you might be doing right now, but what would you be chasing at the moment?
I have a friend who designed a pamphlet using zombies, for example. And at that time, I'm not quite sure right now, but zombies are so popular that you can't go wrong with zombies. Just as an example, like there's certain things that instantly attract attention. And we thought we had it with Sudoku, with Straits. We thought we had the next thing. And it was very interesting. We could not get past the puzzle editors. Like the newspaper bosses said, let's do it. And then they would send the puzzle to the puzzle editors, and they would say that the puzzle is terrible. We can't publish this. It's terrible. And I would come back and I say, well, it's been 10 years in the biggest newspaper in Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and the Germans are the toughest critics in the game industry. There's no question about it. Those Germans are like very, very tough to please. And this puzzle has survived 11 years in their newspapers. So it can't be bad. And, it's like there's always an agenda from somebody else that you are dependent on. So as a young game designer, it's really good if you can make yourself completely independent, completely removed from somebody else judging you, completely removed from somebody saying yes or no. And that independence is the strongest thing in this space now. I think that if you can be self-sufficient and not having somebody judge you if your puzzle is any good, but your viewers, they're confirming that you've got something that is worthwhile.
I'd maybe I always like to ask about kind of the business side of things, and so I'm just curious. I'll put a couple of quick questions out there about Syndicated Puzzles. This is a partnership between you and Andrew, is that right? I know you've done a lot of things like digital games and apps and websites. To the extent that you're willing to share, it seems like though maybe the bulk of your revenue is really from syndication of puzzles, or are you still seeing a lot of revenue these days on the digital side as well?
The revenue for us is very related to what's going on in Germany. So our stronghold is Germany. We basically get book sales. We have online players in many places that make us, I think it's $10 a day. We have people that buy print puzzles off of us. Like we supply newspapers with, Andrew's so organized that he basically has a basket for them to take the puzzles that they need. It's a very, very self-maintaining business. And we're really ashamed of ourselves that Straits didn't make it big time. Like we're really, really disappointed. We had great hope. We've been doing this now for 10, 11 years, and we've never, ever had one larger newspaper call us up and say, look, we would like to have Straits in our paper. Not a single paper. And I'm flabbergasted that nobody came forward to take the puzzle. And I'll explain to you why it's very interesting, because if you're a car maker, there's so many different cars in the marketplace. And I don't care what anyone tells me, this number puzzle industry, it's like a bottleneck. We have such little opportunity to be creative. And, people might argue that with me, but I think, we have a problem that number puzzles and letter puzzles, and they're incredibly saturated. There's very little space to come up with really new concepts. It's a struggle, and the struggle is very, very real. And that's why we were really surprised that people wouldn't jump on board and take on Straits, because it's a sequencing puzzle, and there's not that much done in the sequencing space. So we were really surprised that it didn't go viral. We were, pushing, and we couldn't get past those puzzle editors. They just said that the puzzle is no good. So it was like really bizarre behavior on these big papers. We got it into the London Times, and the editor was from Victoria, British Columbia, where I was from. And he said, I'll get it in there by next Saturday. And then he called me up and says, I'm really sorry. I can't publish this thing. Somebody vetoed it, that it didn't go into the London Times. And the Sudoku example is really, really interesting, because Most people don't know that the book publishers were hiding the Sudoku sales in children's books, or like they were taking Sudoku sales and putting them somewhere else so that people wouldn't realize that it was $1 billion industry. The Sudoku book industry, when at its peak, was like, nobody understands how much money that was. Like, it was in the billions. It wasn't in the millions. It was like insane. And now what's happening is the retailers are removing Sudoku from the shelves. They will tell you they're not doing that. But if you go to a bookstore, the Sudoku shelf keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the reason for that is because the game designers or the publishers haven't put the next Ferrari beside it. They haven't put something there that keeps that enthusiasm going. And the publishers, they blocked all new creativity. They did not really focus on saying, what is the next thing? We need the next thing. Come on, guys. Where's the next thing? Give it to us. Give it to us. And it didn't happen. It really didn't happen. You have Ken, you have Straits, you have a couple other that are good print puzzles. Like, there's a big difference between a good online puzzle and there's a big difference between a print puzzle. And I'll explain that very clearly. The difference is that print puzzles have always only one solution. So you have one solution, and if you mess up that one solution as a puzzle designer, you're toast. Like, you'll never hear the end of it. I think there was a story where a guy had 2 solutions in a Sudoku puzzle, and the editor of the newspaper never got so many emails in his life. How, the puzzle was a mess and blah, blah, blah. So it's like really funny that if you make a mistake, it's more interesting to the Sudoku guys than having perfect puzzles every week. That creativity is not allowed almost. It's like, come on, guys. Like, if you're going to make number puzzles a good category in the world, supply the people with new puzzles, for crying out loud. Don't keep regurgitating Sudokus. Like, how many Sudokus can you play in your life? At one point, your brain is so saturated with how to do them that you need something new. Like, the newness is missing in the number puzzle industry. There's no question about it. Very interesting.
What are some takeaways from building your games that might help aspiring game creators?
The secret weapon is a piece of paper. I think a piece of paper is so underrated. Like, if you're doing all your work on computers and if you're very non-dimensional in your work, I think you're going to miss a lot of things. Like, so take a piece of paper, go through the steps, make flow charts, a pathway for yourself, and then recheck it, go back, add little, even if you have to do little sketches in between the stages. I think the biggest problem in game design is missing the obvious. What happens in real life? What happens when you add one component? What happens when you take a component away? Game design is all about, getting to a stage where the puzzle makes sense. This enjoyability factor. If a puzzle isn't fun, don't bother. Don't waste your time, because it's hard enough to sell a good puzzle, or playable, or whatever it may be. So, it's a tough go if you have a great puzzle. It's a horrible go if you have a really average puzzle. And you can make a very boring puzzle. You can make it exciting. But what you have to do is you have to keep adding to your thought process of what's missing. Like, there's always something missing that you can improve on. And I'm really hoping that the game world goes to these multiple answer puzzles. Multiple answer puzzles or multiple solution puzzles are way more interesting than puzzles that are one solution. And if we could add prizes, okay, whoever comes up with the highest score for Letterlicious gets this prize. Whoever has the most creative solution for this puzzle, his solution is going to be posted, or whatever it may be. There's this real idea of multi-solution puzzles, as being the future of the game, even the print world or even the online world. If you can create puzzles where people are competing for the highest score, and if that all comes together really well, you'll have a winner because you're putting people up against each other. Multiplayer, platforms are way more interesting than some guy sitting there solving a Sudoku. And that is the future of game design, especially online, is if you're competing and if you're thriving to be a better player of a certain game, that'll keep you playing every day. We have that with Letterlicious. We have this, I don't know what it is, but the competitiveness, even the Germans, they play Letterlicious in German or English, and it's like tooth and nail there. And if something goes wrong on that site, Andrew hears about it. Like, oh, this person shouldn't have scored this, or, it's actually in your benefit as a game designer to have flaws in your games because you get so much more interaction with your players. It's bizarre, but it's the way it is. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And honestly, Jeff, you're speaking my love language with sketching and doodling and just getting a piece of paper out. I think that's really great advice. You'd mentioned that a lot of your business comes from Germany. Do you track analytics to your site? Do you kind of like track that stuff? I'm curious, like how much traffic you get. And
Andrew does all that. He did quite overwhelming where these people are coming from. And we haven't done a good job with social media. We haven't promoted ourselves to the extent that we should have. And it's interesting. The Germans are probably the most attractive people to approach with number puzzles and board games. And like, there's a culture there that is, I don't know how to describe it to you. It's like, it's intense, but in a very positive way. And they will let you know if it's a yay or a nay. They don't mess around. The Germans are very straight that way. It's odd when you look at Google Analytics that, you're getting like all of a sudden you have 6,000 people from some weird country, or you have 16,000 people from another weird country. So something happened. Like when you have Google Analytics and then you have all these little activities going on, someone has published something or an exponential, growth thing where somebody plays Straits and then every Saturday they'll come and play again. So it's really interesting. We had this great little event happen in the Süddeutsche Zeitung. So this old German Bavarian guy calls up the editor and starts to swear at him. And he says, look, you have 2 Sudokus in the newspaper. You took one Sudoku out and you put a Straits in instead. What the hell are you doing? He was so mad at the editor. And then he called back a week later and he asked, is there any chance you could have put 2 Straits in and not have a Sudoku? Because they were the wife and him were fighting over playing the Straits puzzle. It was like really bizarre. The puzzle has its own energy. If game designers understand that, look, I'm pulling an elastic band and I'm letting it go. And if you consider your puzzle an elastic band, basically you're energizing a number puzzle. And when you let it go, there's only so much energy left in that elastic band. So if you somehow can keep the energy going by the simple fact that your puzzle is enjoyable, that your puzzle has built-in oddities, built-in satisfaction, it's competitive in nature. You always have a timer beside your Sudoku and Straits puzzle. So it's like people love to compete. I think that's a big takeaway on that. If you can create puzzles where people compete, you're ahead of the game.
Love that. Well, Jeff, as we wrap up here, if you want people to find you online, where should they look?
It's straits.com, and then Andrew is sudokuwiki.org. And then all our games are subcategorized, so you can play 1 to 25, Letterlicious, Straits, like Sudoku variants, Sudoku itself. Like Andrew is constantly adding new puzzles. He just added code word. That's what I'm talking about. We're regurgitating the same puzzles over and over and over again. Like you go to a store and you want to go buy a puzzle book. It's shameful. We should be ashamed of ourselves. How really small the selection is. Like when you have 50 Sudoku books on the shelf and crossword puzzles, and if I was a consumer, I would say like this is the most underdeveloped category in the marketplace. Like you cannot even find Straits books. They won't publish it because I can't get past the puzzle editors. And it's like, what is it that you're selling? You know, like, come on, people, let's get some new puzzles out there. Let's get some new energy in this market.
Well, for all game creators out there who are listening to this, and you need to get your game roasted, I think Jeff is who you should be sending your games to. You're going to get honest feedback from you. That's right.
To have a roast, yeah. I have helped a lot of people. And I'll tell you what's interesting is there's almost everything that people create. There's one little thing that they miss. And that one little thing is like, it drives me crazy. It's like, how could you miss that? You know, when I was doing H2O Land with the Dutch designer, it was like, that doesn't happen in real life. Why would you put that? Why would we put that in the game? You do this, and this is what happens in real life. And we've got to keep everything real as well. And like, I have this puzzle that I have in a drawer, and this puzzle, it's a number puzzle that has a goddamn tunnel built into it. And I'm going like, where did this come from? So you fill in a number on one side and you can get to the other side. And it's like, those are the things that I love, is when something exceptional inside a boring concept, you know, like that's beautiful. Like Straits has it. Like you have all these little oddities, and oddities are refreshing. You know, it's not like Sudoku and you're solving systematically. It's interesting.
Well, this has been a really interesting journey, Jeff, and we just want to say thanks for being here.
Not a problem. I appreciate it as well for having me.